Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of Non-Duality with Kyle Hubin and Syed. In this episode, we dive deep into the heart of direct experience versus intellectual understanding. Kyle responds to questions from listeners who are struggling with glimpses of peace, the challenge of sustaining it, and what's really missing on the path. Together, we explore the difference between knowing about non-duality as a concept and actually living it moment to moment. We also unpack Kyle's book, The Method, 5 Self-Inquiry Steps to Enlightenment, breaking down each step from proving what's real without thinking to letting go of even the idea of freedom itself. Along the way, we discuss seeking, daydreaming, the role of presence, and why awakening can feel both natural and impossibly out of reach, until it isn't. If you've ever wondered why understanding isn't enough, or how to approach your inner world like a scientist instead of a believer, this conversation is for you. Let's get into it.
Welcome everyone to episode number 3 of Non-Duality with Kyle Hubin and Syed. On today's episode, we'll be answering the questions from episode 1, and we'll also be discussing the book written by Kyle, The Method, 5 Self-Inquiry Steps to Enlightenment. Welcome back, Kyle.
Thank you, Syed.
All right, let's go straight into the first question from one of the audience members.
The first question from the comment section. I understand the concept of non-duality, but struggle with the experiential/feeling of it. I've had glimpses, but find it hard to sustain the level of peace for more than a few mere moments at a time. What's missing?
Yeah, so this person brings up a good point, which I think is pretty common for everybody who's, discovered the concept of non-duality, which is many believe that, it's about understanding some mental perspective on things, and then, Bob's your uncle, and everything else should just fall into place just by mentally grasping the concept of non-duality. But they're honest here. They say, I struggle with the experiential feeling of it. And really, non-duality is entirely an experiential feeling-based thing. It has nothing to do really with thinking. It has nothing to do with um, the importance of understanding concepts. And yet, when you come across non-duality, a lot of importance is placed on the words, and the concepts, and those are almost pedestalized as the Holy Grail, you know, and which is why you sometimes see a lot of immature um, spiritual folks who really attach themselves to non-dual concepts, because it's easier to do that than to actually, let that sink in to your moment to moment experience of life and transform your actual behavior, you
Yeah.
know. um, sorry, there's another part to that. Yeah, I've had glimpses, but find it hard to sustain the level of peace for more than a few moments at a time. What's missing? Yeah, so again, that kind of is a carryover from believing the hype around all of the words around non-duality, which is, if you really just get it, you know, if you really just mentally get it, then, there should be no problem from now on. Peace
Mm.
should be with you all the time. And that's just not how it works. Non-duality is the best description you can come up with for, as far as descriptions go, to describe the greater reality here. Um, but having that be your actual experience is a whole other thing. And the only way for that to happen is to really approach your inner world from a very neutral place, kind of turning your inner world into a laboratory almost, becoming kind of an inner scientist where you're very detached from what's happening, not denying what's happening, but kind of taking the position of observing everything that's happening in you, everything that arises moment to moment. And, who is it that's doing that? Well, that's the very heart of non-duality. It's this background consciousness that's just um, taking everything in, that's not separating itself from everything that's happening. And so all of the identification that is in the stuff, all of the activity that's happening starts to become less believable the more you just kind of move through your life silently observing everything from a non-judgmental, neutral place, you know?
I think many spiritual seekers, especially like I would say maybe someone who's older and has been seeking for over like 10, maybe 20 years and have read all the books, have a very deep understanding of the history and all those things is how am I still not getting it?
Yeah. 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 And that's, the books have a part to play in the process of getting to the heart of things. It's when you have reach a certain point of mental clarity through concepts, then there's a next stage, you could say, which is leaving it all behind and finding out for yourself what can be really proven in your own direct experience of life. And so it doesn't really matter how long you've been studying, non-duality. It's like you can study what ice cream tastes like for 40 years,
Mm.
you know, if you've never tasted it or gone to the store to go and buy it so you can taste it, or just take an action to taste it, then you're going to remain kind of immature because you've only settled for the idea of it. Really beautiful. There's some wonderful poets that can describe the experience of ice cream really well, but it's still a booby prize. You know?
Back from episode one, when you were in high school and seeking, you weren't really reading the non-duality books, but you were still on the path. Could you relate it
Yeah.
to like how a seeker, how even though like the concept of non-duality wasn't really in your seeking story, but you were still seeking something?
Like, are you asking how was that particular period for me related in some way? How does it relate to non-duality?
Yeah, because you were seeking without, you know, actively, thinking about non-duality in this
Yeah.
type of way.
Yeah. I mean, every human being um, is seeking non-duality, really. Seeking non-duality just means seeking the end of inner division, feeling the end of yourself. Everybody's seeking to end themselves, pretty much, because nobody's ever going to be fully satisfied with themselves, no matter how content you might seem. Uh, there's always going to be something a little off because you're the truth. You are, um, and the truth won't. I was just saying this to someone recently. The truth will never be satisfied until it's fully itself again, until it fully returns to itself. It doesn't matter how nice it can make the experience, the illusion of a separate self be or become, it'll never quite be enough. You know, just look at everybody who's attained material success in the world. They always reach that point where it's like, you know, oh crap, you know, what now? It's because they're still stuck with the booby prize, which is themselves. So everybody, whether you call it non-duality or not, everybody is seeking non-duality, the end of duality, the end of, and so long as you think of yourself, period, you are there. That is a duality, and it will never be enough in the sense of permanent peace, you know?
The second question from the comment section. For the past few months, I've been obsessively discarding unnecessary secondary knowledge, taking cues from the method, 5 inquiry steps to enlightenment. There have been moments where it was perceived with absolute clarity that there is nothing lacking in the first place, and therefore nothing to gain. Made me laugh and cry like crazy. How stupid I've been grasping and clinging. Nowadays, discarding of secondary knowledge seems to happen more often, like some automatic process. My question is, am I suppressing my past emotions by discarding unnecessary secondary knowledge? Or should I recollect past traumas, let the emotions surface and deeply examine them instead of discarding rapidly? In other words, by allowing myself to rest in presence persistently, am I suppressing something?
Yeah. So my answer to that would be, if you're truly resting in presence, there's absolutely no way that you can suppress anything because you're basically opening the door to everything coming in. And that includes all past traumas. You know, life will actually provide even circumstances that might bring up memories of that on its own. If your priority is just being present, that's really all you have to do. But it's easier said than done because it requires an immense amount of vigilance and vulnerability, a willingness to let everything in and let everything come up. When you're fully present, you're not suppressing anything. You're literally just opening up to whatever wants to come up, what wants to happen. Um, so no repression happening there. You know, the repression actually requires forced thought. You know, if something comes up and it's like and there's an unwillingness to meet it, then there's going to be some kind of thought process that comes in that tries to force it out by thinking about something else or whatever. But if you're present, and there's nothing there to force anything out, so it's all just going to come up on its own in good time. You know, life is benevolent in that way. When it gets the nod from you that you're ready to see whatever needs to be seen, it doesn't always unload it all at once. You know, it kind of gives you it in doses that you can assimilate, you know. Does that cover that? I'll have another look. Sorry. So yeah, you're not discarding secondary knowledge, right? The method is not a process. I can see why you would say it like that, but it's not really a process of discarding secondary knowledge. You're just making your primary knowledge your priority, the most important thing. And as a byproduct, all the unnecessary secondary knowledge, everything you've learned, just falls to the wayside on its own. There's no like personal will that's trying to throw something in the dumpster, you know?
Mm.
So, yeah, no need to worry there.
It does feel like maybe life doesn't want you to wake up.
Well, what makes you say that?
It feels like all the effort is coming from the person forcing something out, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't say life as if it's the separate thing that's,
Mm,
you know, controlling you like you're a little puppet that it's, kicking around. Um, I would say it's giving you exactly what you want, what you're ready for.
mm,
It's healthier to look at it like a mirror,
mm,
right? Or an echo chamber, you know? Um, so if you don't really want to see how things really are, then you'll get a lot of that. You'll get a lot of stuff thrown at you that'll pull your attention away and be very seductive and,
mm,
you know, but throwing out the victim is like, that's priority number one in a way. If you're going to
mm,
make your primary knowledge sticking with, and what is your primary knowledge? It's just what you know already from birth, really, that was never told to you, that really, even if is disagreed with from the outside, it can't really convince you that it's not true because it's just a fact. That's your primary knowledge. And that's really what is that? It's just a silent knowingness of I amness, I-ness, not a me-ness, but that there is in fact a witnessing consciousness. That's your primary knowledge.
The questioner brought up the book you wrote called The Method: Five Self-Inquiry Steps to Self-Realization. Um, why is the method a self-inquiry method and not maybe like a meditate 5 hours a day for 2 years method? Any
Yeah.
insight?
Yeah. So someone even once in the comments for the book pointed out that it's not even a method, which is in a way true. All I did was observe what are the common key points in the self-inquiry process that kind of happen on the way to awakening. And so I just put them in order.
Mm.
What was the question? What did you just ask?
Why not another method like meditate 5 hours a day for 2 years?
Right. Yeah. So the issue with other methods I've seen is that they are all about trying to achieve a state of some
Mm.
kind. And the method is really about pointing out all of the states that you're already trying to achieve and how futile they all are. And so it's not about giving you a new method, it's just about focusing attention on all of the methods you've already adopted, you could say, and how they're not working and how they distract from real reality. And
Mm.
and moving through life moment to moment, if your awareness is not fully anchored and just everywhere you go, and it's being pulled away by this thought and blah blah, this feeling, that emotion, those are all methods that your mind has employed from a long time ago, usually, to try and bring about peace for you. And they all fail, they all don't work,
Mm.
they'll never work. So this method that I wrote is about pointing out all of how all methods don't work.
Uh-oh. Huh. Was it challenging to write the book? Or,
No, like I said, I just kind of stepped back
mm,
and looked at, well, and I used my own experience as a guide, obviously, just like and then I observed the similarities with every other awakening story you might have heard. And yeah, they all have these key hallmarks, key points in the journey that correlate. And so those are the ones I wrote down just so that people feel maybe a little less lost, that they're not delusional if a certain thing starts happening, or, and it starts off gently with a gentle, sincere impulse to start getting to the heart of things. That's why the first step in the method is just prove what's real without thinking.
Mm.
What do you know for sure when you're not thinking? It's pretty gentle. Then, of course, it can get really colorful when it gets to the point where it's like confront the dream, which isn't even actually real confrontation in the way you'd think. It's just more like, so I skipped over the second step, which is once you've verified in your own experience what is real, then that realness is what comes first. That realness, what you've been able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, is what should come first, obviously, if that's what's real, which is just this witnessing consciousness. That must become the priority. So then the third step is
Let's
confront.
start with step one and go through all the steps.
Yeah.
Step one, prove what's real without thinking. Could you explain a little bit more?
Let's think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously I am committing a crime. I'm contradicting the very step by thinking about it. Right. But
Mm.
it's just a willingness to become absolutely honest with especially if you're an intellectual type, someone who loves to dissect things with their mind and figure things out.
Mm.
It's about becoming ruthlessly honest about what you actually know that's never been told to you, that you never learned from anybody, that you have always known. What is that? And when you're silent, eventually it becomes more and more clear that you don't really know a whole lot at all. That's why in the book I say you really only know one thing. Like true knowledge, true primary knowledge. There's only one primary thing that you know, and that's just that you know. You know that something knows, something's there. You were going to call this podcast Something's Happening, right? Or something like that.
Yeah. Something's going on.
Something's going on. That's pretty much what you know. Even the Einsteins of the world, if they broke it all down and were really honest with themselves, that would be the conclusion. But most are not willing to go that deep. So that's the best I can do at
Mm.
pointing to step one there. The actual, you know, it's more meaningful when you verify step one in your own experience, obviously. When you become quiet and you ask yourself that question, what do I really know right now without thinking, without distracting myself from what's happening right now? And you may get as close as, well, I know that I'm, having a tightness in my stomach. So it feels like you're getting closer in that way, but still it's like, who knows that? Who is it that knows that? And is that not an interpretation still?
Mm.
Like, it's good to be that honest, like, okay, and be that close to home, describing what's going on in the body. And I use that as ways of going inside a lot, but it's still not quite at the core. It's like, it's still a description of what's happening. It's still a label. So maybe I don't entirely know that. There's certainly a sensation, but who is it happening to? What is that I know? what do I know about the I that knows this? You know, what is that?
I would say I know that I'm not dead right now.
Yeah, and then you go deeper with that and say, well, who is it that's not dead?
Hmm.
You know, what does dead mean for who?
Mhm.
You know,
Your other book is called The Moment of Your Death. Is there a relationship to step one with death? Or
yeah, yeah. Because death is really ignorance. That's all death really is when it comes to self-awareness.
hmm.
Um, so step one is really the end of being dead. It's the beginning of being alive,
Hmm.
no longer ignoring life moment to moment. Death is ignorance. That's all. Ignorance of the moment.
Hmm.
That's why we use the word zombie, right? You're literally the walking dead when um, when you're ignoring the moment.
Now we can move on to step number two. What's real comes first.
Yeah. So if you approach step one with a genuine sincerity and curiosity, um, that should naturally flower into step two. If you really are like, oh my gosh, the only thing I really know is that there's an I of some kind that knows things. That's really all I really know. And the things that I know is not what I really know because they're just secondhand knowledge. And
Hmm.
if that really hits home, usually it sparks a deeper curiosity uh, that kind of moves you into that next phase or stage, which is, well, if that's really all I know, then all of this other stuff that I take to be ultimate truth that I place as the priority, that shouldn't be the priority. It should be sticking with what I really know for sure. So that's step two is what's real comes first. You know? Thing you know for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that is actually your ultimate truth is that there's just something's aware of itself. So that should be always at the top of the list moving forward. If you really want to get to the heart of things, get to the bottom of things, naturally, what you know for sure should be the most important thing, which is silence, silent observing, silent witnessing.
Witnessing all the time.
Noticing that you are never really not witnessing all the time.
Hmm.
You know, that's actually the truth. When there's no ignorance happening, you're always witnessing. Consciousness is always aware of itself. It's it fills the room, right?
I think many people, when applying the method, might encounter, wow, I'm daydreaming all the time.
Yeah. So it is a wake up call,
Hmm.
you know, and some people become so frustrated with seeing that that they just toss the book in the garbage, you know, or they'll just go on to something else that's spiritual that gives them a bit more comfort and allows them to ruminate in their spiritual comfort zones, you know, without really having to go into the nitty gritty. So yeah, initially you're going to bump up against just how often you've been listening to a program that has you constantly looking away from reality. And that's going to feel sometimes, unless you're kind of an experienced meditator, then maybe your mind isn't quite as active. And, you know, so like, like on Amazon, if you look at the reviews, there's one woman that reviewed the book and it was like, you know, this book, it's amazing that a whole book could be written about absolutely nothing to talk
Huh.
about, and that would be a typical response from someone who tried to at least made the initial attempt to see what's going on. I was like, screw this,
Hmm.
I'm not ready for that. And then there was another fellow on the other end of the spectrum that was like, uh, all very grateful. And so it really does come down to where you're at, what you're ready
Hmm.
for.
Regarding the book, the method, and the steps, what's the relationship to daydreaming throughout the day and the method?
The relation to daydreaming. Well, what is daydreaming? What do you think daydreaming is?
A constant habit of let me think about this thing that's very important that I need to do.
Right. Yeah. It's so there's always a good enough reason to look away from the moment to
Hmm.
distract yourself. Um, it's basically just kind of the default me programming that helps sustain a consistent sense of me-ness. Because once consciousness starts looking closely, more consistently, then alarm bells start going off for that character, and it starts to default to this base program of look away, look over there, think about where that person bought those shoes. You know,
Hmm.
it's all kinds of stuff. And that's the other thing helpful to point out is there's never any benign distractions. You know, all distractions have a purpose behind them, even if they seem insignificant. Anything that pulls you away from the moment is pulling you away because there is an emergency signal being sent off, sometimes really loud and sometimes subtle, but it's saying that get the hell away from here. You're going to die,
Hmm.
if you stay here too long. The truth will start to come out if you stay here too long.
Hmm.
So, daydreaming, it's a nice, fluffy way of describing the survival, the struggle to survive.
Um, you don't daydream as much as you did before and after awakening, or
Well, it doesn't serve any beneficial purpose. The mystics like to call all of this a dream, a cosmic dream. So, what point is there in having a secondary dream when you can just be awake to this dream? It's much more tangible, you know,
hmm.
you know, it's more engaging, way
Oh,
more lucid. So, yeah, it's not because I've achieved some wonderful mastery of non-daydreaming. It's that it's just not as good.
oh, okay. And were you daydreaming back in high school when you were?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And always what underpinned all of the daydreaming was this subtle, constant search for fulfillment,
hmm.
because what's here is not enough. That's why you daydream.
Oh, okay.
It's painful for what's here to not be enough.
Hmm.
Nobody wants to feel that naturally. If that's the belief, which is the case for most people, it's this label that what's here is lacking something.
Okay. Step 3, confront the dream.
Mhm. So yeah, the natural progression from what's real coming first is you are reapproaching, you could say, your entire life situation from this innocent place, from these fresh eyes that are seeing from the place of truth. And so now you're kind of looking at your entire life that you've built around yourself, almost like, have you ever visited one of those like museums that is laid out to kind of show how someone who's dead now used to live, and like it shows their
Mm,
bedroom, and so you're kind of looking at life from that way now. You're kind of confronting the dream that you've created around yourself for that particular character that you had taken yourself to be. And I say confront because there's usually a tendency to no longer go along with it as easily. And sometimes that can become a colorful thing. People will sense if you're no longer buying into the agreed upon storyline, you know?
mm,
So, and it does kind of take courage, really. Uh, so the word confront kind of comes from that. It takes courage to just say, stop, and like look at it, really look at what's going on here. Who is this dream for? What does this say about the character that I've taken myself to be, about,
mm.
what I've believed I can attain through being this character? That's all I have to say about that.
S- Step number 4. Wait, let me re-say it. Step number 4, allow yourself to end.
Yeah. So if this has been your practice for a while, and sometimes it can be for a long while, or sometimes this can be a very rapid process. But after a while of confronting the dream and recognizing everything you're not by seeing how everything else is really just dream-like stuff that you've placed around you, once you've been in that space for a while, you kind of eventually get to a place where it's okay, if none of that is who I am, then what's next? And and of course, what's next is not for that person who's asking the question. It's so that this is the beginning of a willingness to allow the character to end, allowing yourself to end. It's not really consciousness that's ending. It's the thought-based character, the personality, that's kind of seeing its own futility, and then allowing that, taking the final steps to just kind of let go of itself, to give up on itself. And nothing is really dying or ending, in the ultimate sense through that process, because you are consciousness. You're the background that everything dies into. So that's always there. But um, certainly that point comes eventually where it's like, okay, I can't go back into this dream world now that I've seen everything for what it is. So then what's next? Well, it would just be more dream stuff if there was something that was next.
Mm.
So then it must be me that has to, so that's where there's a stepping away, a deeper stepping away from being the character that starts to happen. And the background starts coming to the foreground, that silent background. Mm.
Step number 5, let go of freedom.
Yeah. So I was being a bit mischievous when I wrote that one because to the mind it's like, what? Everything kind of made sense up until that point. Why would I let go of freedom? Well, the simple fact is, what are you talking about freedom?
Mm,
You know, because to talk about freedom means imprisonment is real, is also a reality, you know? So it's really a freedom, stepping into a freedom that is even better than any kind of freedom the mind can think of.
mm,
It's a freedom where you're not there. The burden of having to be here is let go of. And I always say that, step 5 is really a non-step. You don't take that step. That's really just when life decides that the fruit is ripe and it just lets go of it from the tree, you know. But it is still, you could say, a step. It is something noticeable that happens. And that would be, you could say, the moment of awakening,
mm.
of, full awakening where it's time to eat the fruit. You know?
You mentioned the ripe fruit. I think some seekers or people interested in this kind of thing are thinking, why is this taking so long?
Yeah. So, yeah, that question comes from a place where you've decided already what you're supposed to arrive at.
Mm,
And it's supposed to be for you, the thinker, for the mind. The mind is supposed to be what becomes free. That comes from that belief. So, yeah, it's going to take a long time because it's never going to happen.
regarding the ripe seeker, is that happening in a very natural way? The seeker is becoming ripe over time or over lifetimes?
Yeah. And it's usually, it doesn't remove how life is arranged and designed for you to still play your part and play your role. Because a part of what I've observed is that those who are ready for awakening or close to it tend to have a much more engaged part to play in the awakening process, whether it looks on the outside as though they're letting go more, they're, opening up more. Uh, those are indicators of ripeness,
Mm,
You can't speed that up. On one level, you can't speed it up, and yet observing those who are close to awakening, it does seem like by the more that process of opening up happens and the interest in that intensifies, that the awakening process does seem to speed up. Uh, but it seems to be the natural way of things. It's not some egoic, I'm going to make this happen kind of thing. It's just the way the part is designed to unfold.
mm.
Whatever dreamed all of this into being was a poet,
Oh, okay.
an artist. You know,
It doesn't always seem that way.
no, but that's why it's such beautiful poetry.
Mm,
It knows how to make things look the exact opposite of poetry. That's how good the poetry is.
mm. I think a good way to end all the podcasts would be with the quote from maybe one or two teachers. So for today, this quote is somewhat related to the first question, and the quote is from one teacher named David Scoma. He said, "You don't know anything until you know it directly." Could you comment?
Yeah. Um, yeah. What is knowledge without direct experience? you know? It's just belief. That's all it is. So, and thank heavens for that. You know, thank heavens that life is actually meaningful and has depth. That it doesn't just end. The game doesn't just end because you kind of half-ass understood some teachings and you abided by them. You know, that's pretty lame. You know, thank God that it's actually set up that it's set up to be very meaningful for each human being. Eventually, it's going to become incredibly meaningful, profound, because it's going to happen through each person's direct experience. You're going to know it firsthand. You're going to taste the ice cream, you know? Yeah. Yeah, I like that one.
Okay, everyone, that was episode number 3 of Non-Duality with Kyle Hubin and Syed. See you next time on episode number 4.